When Copernicus and Galileo attacked the science of their time, they too suffered at the hands of established opinion. Whilst demanding a retraction of their heresy, the Church conveniently ignored the growing gulf between evidence and its own pet theories. But the Earth became increasingly round and drifted even further from the center of the universe. This is the problem with interest. And I'm reading from the introduction here. The author says, to my mind, the economics embodied in the religion of Islam probably constitutes the last remaining serious challenge to free market capitalism. However, because the Muslim world is not yet in a position to lecture the West on how to attain economic success, I hope that I strike a sufficiently modest note in offering my insights. Tariq ad-Diwani. The author graduated in accountancy and finance at the University of Lancaster in 1985, and he's worked as a dealer in conventional capital markets for several years, and he also lectures now in the areas of financial mathematics and options theory. And since then, he's been involved in the development of investment products according to Islamic principles. He runs an institution out of London that consults on Islamic finance. This is a rather old print of the book. It's from 1997, and it is far from a theoretical survey of the rules of interest in Islam. It draws heavily upon the author's own practical experience in modern banking and finance, and it challenges some of the normative assumptions behind banking and finance. It starts with 6 main chapters and a conclusion. Possibly the first 2 chapters are the most beneficial, and they present his argument against what he sees as the chief cause of economic injustice, and that is the manufacture of money and its lending and interest by commercial banks. The first chapter catalogs the prohibition of interest throughout different religions and cultures, and then speaks about how interest itself goes against the physical order of the universe, one in which capacity constraints exist, and in order to meet high rates of interest must boost productivity of physical capital, thus exacerbating and accelerating the depletion of wealth and the dire effects that all of that can have upon the entropic, earthbound system. So there's this whole discussion of entropy and its relation to interest, which is quite interesting. In chapter 2, he draws heavily on the conclusions of chapter 1, and he attacks the idea of fractional reserve banking and the creation of money in conventional banks by showing how wealth went from gold and silver to receipts, and now it went from receipts to checks, and then went from checks to basically ticks on a computer screen. These amounts are loaned out at fractional amounts for interest, and the modern banking system stands ready to lend an unlimited amount of state money to commercial banks if ever required, while maintaining a fractional reserve. So this idea of the lender of last resort function is then tackled along with the liquidity in the bank system and how essentially there is a manipulation of money and the value of the purchasing power is depleted from the pockets of ordinary people in the author's view. The author then starts to offer alternatives, such as returning to a gold standard or 100% reserve banking, both which are not realistic and both which will probably never happen. He strikes chords between the differences between investments and gambling, and then speaks at length about differences between wealth creation and wealth transfer, i.e. investing in profitable businesses which take risks and the risks are shared, or simply guaranteeing a return on wealth which is transferred from one party to another contingent on certain conditions being met. Chapter 5 discusses the idea of values between positive and normative economics, and essentially talks about the idea of, where do our values come from? What are we basing all of these ideas on? Let's stop acting like empirical positive economics is value free. He states that although there is a claim that value judgments are not made in positive economics, they are, but they are not immediately apparent, but they are ever present. They are assumed, and they affect how decisions are made, even when we're claiming to build our decisions off of empirical data alone. The author then delves into the idea of Islamic economics and where the values of that system would come from. But like most of those that comment on this topic, seems to quickly involve himself in discussing legal particulars instead of higher level concepts and the same values that he was championing before. The chapter ends with a promotion of the implementation of Islamic legal particulars within a holistic system, and the author states that elements of Islamic law, when applied individually, may prove as unsuccessful as the policies they were intended to improve upon. Meaning, when you try to take one thing, one contract of Islamic law, and not apply it within the regulatory system it was created in, then you're always going to have problems. And he's kind of foreshadowing in this, in the next, to what he's going to talk about in the next couple of chapters, which is why so many Islamic financial instruments seem to fail or to be used for nefarious purposes. It's because they're being implemented without their broader frameworks that guide the employment or the deployment of such contracts in those systems that would have naturally remedies and solutions at default and whenever problems arise. In chapter 6, he covers the idea of trade or interest and discusses the Islamic approach to each. And he talks a little bit about the prohibition of usury and other key concepts in Islamic law. Suffice it to say that his discussion of interest in Islamic law is very limited, and it's somewhat limiting and used mainly for the purpose of bolstering his own argument, which is the necessity of replacing conventional banking. So all in all, this is a good book. I actually know the author, and we've had several discussions when I was working in the Islamic finance industry in the Middle East, and I think that he knows his stuff well. The first 2 chapters are especially good, and I think that they definitely should be read. However, as I mentioned, it's an old book. My print's from 1997, and it could probably be improved upon with more current research, but perhaps I just have an old copy and I haven't seen his additions. I'm certain that if newer research and findings were incorporated about how Islamic law and Islamic thought views interest, and those were expanded upon, then the book could be much more beneficial for those that are interested in the topic. It's definitely not the be-all, end-all book to speak to you about interest in Islamic thought, but it certainly does live up to its own title and discusses the problem with interest, especially according to the view of the author. So, have you read this book? If you have, let me hear from you in the comments. Let me know what your thoughts on the book were. Why did it interest you? And are there any criticisms, critiques, or praise that you have for it? Are there other books on the topic that you would recommend in English or in Arabic or in any language, quite frankly? And if you've enjoyed this video, then please like it and subscribe, share it with your friends, and let's hear from you. And I'll see you next time inside my library.